What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Martian MMA podcast. I am your host, and my name is John. And this week we are back with episode 97, where we will be analyzing and predicting the UFC Fight Night going down this Wednesday, May 13th, 2020, starting at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, taking place from Jacksonville, Florida. We got 11 fights from Jacksonville. This fight night has a lot of different names, ESPN Plus, Fight Night, whatever it is. It's going down from Jacksonville, Florida this Wednesday, a special time. The UFC is running a lot of events to make up for that deficit during the coronavirus. We just got done UFC 249 this past weekend, and we are getting right into another fight night. There's another card this weekend too, so there will be a lot of Martian MMA episodes this week. Just a quick note on UFC 249, it was an incredible pay-per-view. It was so great to have the UFC back. I think the card overperformed in all aspects, and the main event was just sensational. If you listened to the podcast last week, I did say I was putting my biggest bet ever on Justin Gaethje. I said that the odds were off by 30%, and guess what? They were off by more than 30. They were off by close to 40%, I would say. The odds capped Justin Gaethje at around 35%. And he ended up looking about like a 75-80% favorite in there. It was a complete bell-to-bell domination, ending in knockout in the 5th round for Justin Gaethje. And the biggest bet ever of my betting career did cash. It was the most successful betting night of my UFC career. So I hope to keep that going with this week. But I definitely do not have as strong feelings in the betting lines for these fights. I don't have any fights I particularly love, although I think I have a good sense on how these fights will play out. So getting things started in the heavyweight division, we have Chase Sherman taking on Ike Villanueva. The opening betting line for this one was Villanueva, the minus 140 favorite, to Sherman plus 120. Since then, the line has flipped. We're now seeing Sherman minus 155 to Villanueva plus 135. And I definitely agree with the line movement in this one. I think that Sherman should definitely be the favorite in this one. I think he can be even more of a favorite than what he stands at now. Although it is low-level heavyweight, it's short notice, I believe, for both of these guys. Sherman has a lot of UFC experience, but was cut after suffering a lot of losses a few years back, has been winning fights over an island fight and bare knuckle fighting, staying very active, and Villanueva has been picking up some low-level victories, I have to say. His opponents have not been good. He looks rather fat in some of these fights. Those were at 205 too, and this fight is at heavyweight. Villanueva actually fought as low as 185. He fought most of his career at middleweight and has just been ballooning up in his past few fights. So I don't like the heavyweight move for him necessarily. I have not been impressed with his past 4 fights. There are 4 knockouts, but there is nothing to like in those fights. Just slow boxing, sloppy punches from Villanueva. And I think that Sherman is just a lot more technical in all aspects of MMA. I don't expect to see any takedowns from either guy in this one, but Sherman has been throwing a leg kick in his most recent fights that has been giving him a lot of success. And I just think that Sherman having the cleaner boxing technique, having that leg kick, and probably being the better athlete, being in better shape here, I think that he wins this fight. I think he should be around minus 200 favorite in this one. I think that Villanueva is pretty much knockout or bust, and I've not seen any decent knockout power from him. And I think Sherman actually has a pretty good chin, and he's been looking pretty durable in his fights lately. So pretty confident in Sherman in this one. I wouldn't go too crazy on betting on this because it's low-level heavyweight, but I do think that Sherman at minus 155, this line that he's at right now, is actually a lot of value. So the pick, once again, Sherman by decision here, and he might even get a knockout. The next fight is in the bantamweight division. We have Hunter Azure taking on Brian Kelleher. The opening betting line for this one was Azure minus 200, Kelleher plus 170. Right now, the line margins have tightened up. We're seeing Azure minus 175, Kelleher plus 155. So more action coming in Kelleher's way. And I agree with the line movement here too. I think that even now the line is still a bit wide. I think that Azure looked pretty good in his most recent fights. He got that Tuesday Night Contender Series win over Okan. He dominated him throughout that fight, and he looked pretty good in his UFC debut, picking up a victory over a very well-rounded Katona. I think he got taken down in the round 3 of that fight and lost round 3, but he was very physical in that fight. He was getting takedowns, stuffing takedowns, winning the striking exchanges, but I just don't think his striking has too much depth to it. I think he kind of just wings punches, and he's very athletic. He's a very good grappler, but I think that he hasn't really faced too much opposition in his UFC run so far. I mean, Katona does not really have too sound defensive grappling, and Okan certainly didn't. And I was just unimpressed with Azure's top game versus Okan. He was on top for 5 to 7 minutes, dominating that fight, going for chokes and all types of submissions, but just couldn't get the finish. Just didn't seem to have too much finishing ability on the ground. And Kelleher is very solid on the ground as well. He had a very nice victory by submission in his last fight. He just took O'Day Osborne down, grinded him against the cage, and eventually was able to get a nice Armin guillotine choke, which is probably his most reliable choke, is the guillotine. And it's definitely going to be a factor in this fight. Azure looking for takedowns. Kelleher's front chokes might prevent Azure from getting those takedowns so easily. And on the feet, I think it's going to be really competitive. I don't see a clear advantage to either guy. I think Kelleher actually has the better volume of the two. I mean, Azure landed only 40 strikes in that fight versus Katona that he won. And Kelleher has had pretty good volume in his decision wins. Most notably, Barao, he landed 100 strikes. He landed 80 strikes versus Kelleher. And I think that he has the more reliable volume throughout the 3 rounds. So I'm actually going to side with Kelleher in this one. I agree with Azure being a slight favorite, maybe 55%, minus 130 towards Azure, but I definitely think that this plus 150 is a good amount of value on Kelleher. I think the striking is competitive. I don't think either guy will be out-grappling each other. I think the bigger submission threat is Kelleher on the ground too, so I'm going to pick Kelleher by decision in this one. I like the value on plus 155. Have not locked in a bet yet, but I will look to continue monitoring Kelleher's price throughout the week to make a bet. The next fight is in the lightweight division. We have Gabriel Benitez taking on Omar Morales, and the opening betting line for this one was Morales the favorite at minus 215, Benitez plus 165. Right now we are seeing Morales minus 175, Benitez plus 155. So Benitez moving up in weight. He's fought his entire career at 145. He might have had a few 55 fights in his entire career, and I think he's actually the more proven mixed martial artist. I mean, Morales does not have that much footage. He only had about 7 to 8 minutes worth of footage outside of the UFC, including the Contender Series, and he did get 15 minutes worth of fight time versus Dong Hyun Ma in his last fight. He just did not prove that much about his game. He stalled in top position for like 5 to 7 minutes in that fight. Ma had just absolutely nothing off his back, was just going for weak Kimuras, and Morales was content to stay on top. Nothing against Morales. He just did the bare minimum to win that fight. He only landed like 40 strikes throughout that fight. It was not an impressive volume performance. He didn't really show too much depth to his game, although he did drop Ma with a really nice spinning back kick in round 3. That was definitely his best moment of the fight. But we just don't know much about Morales besides that he's an orthodox striker. He's got a decent right hand, a good calf kick, and just basic kickboxing skills, to be honest. We don't know much about his ground game except for what we saw of him stalling on top versus Dong Hyun Ma. And from what I saw there, he doesn't seem to be looking to pass guard. He doesn't seem to be a submission threat. Doesn't seem to have much wrestling. I think he just caught a kick and turned it into a takedown. So he's not a takedown threat. So I don't think he'll be able to out-grapple Benitez. So I think this one will be entirely contested on the feet. And there, I just think it'll be extremely competitive. And I think these exchanges might even go Benitez's way. I think I know he has much more MMA experience. He's almost a 30-fight veteran. He's been in the UFC for much longer. And his last fight versus Sadiq Youssef was actually a pretty good performance. He was a 2-1 underdog in that fight, and he made it really close. He had some good moments. He rocked Sadiq Youssef with a straight left hand. His inside leg kick was looking good. So I think Benitez has much more experience fighting orthodoxes than Morales does fighting southpaws, and I think that Benitez's straight left hand might find a home. That inside leg kick, that his left kick is just really good. He goes to the body, head, inside leg kick with it. I think that that's going to be a big tool in this fight, and I just think that what we've seen from Benitez, we can believe that he will be the more active, he will be the more consistent and successful striker in this fight. And Morales might surprise us and show some more depth to his game, up his output from what we've seen in his fights against Park and against Ma. But we just don't have anything on tape to believe that Morales should be this much of a favorite in this fight. The size advantage is definitely a factor in this fight. That's why Morales is so favored. But I mean, Morales is not a big 155er. He's only 5'10". He's only going to have 1 or 2 inches of height and 1 or 2 inches of reach. So I think Benitez will be game in this fight. I think it'll be very competitive, and I like the value on Benitez as the dog, and I actually think he wins a close decision in this one. I think he's got the better volume. He's got a technique advantage on the feet as well, and I think that we're going to see some experience advantage for Benitez here too. So I'm expecting a very close fight. I like the value on Benitez at plus 155. Again, have not locked in a bet, but we'll be monitoring that price throughout the week to find a good price to go in at. So the pick is Benitez by decision. The next fight is in the women's bantamweight division. We have Azure-Eubanks taking on Sarah Moras. Azure-Eubanks was the massive favorite, minus 275 at opening, plus 235 on Moras. People are still betting Eubanks all the way down to minus 380, Moras plus 315. I won't spend too much time on this fight, but I will just summarize it real quick. I think Eubanks is better everywhere. I think she's the better striker, certainly the better grappler, much better on top. Can actually do damage on top, while Moras is an okay grappler, an okay striker. She's just very sloppy, not too good anywhere. And once again, Eubanks is just better everywhere. I think that she wins this fight, but it's probably going to be sloppy. It's going to be ugly. I think there'll be moments where Eubanks does not look a minus 400 favorite. So it's a total pass. If you want to toss a half a unit on Moras, I don't blame you, because I think that there is some value there, but I think that Eubanks wins the decision in this one, and it's going to be a very sloppy, ugly fight, and I would not advise betting it at all. Actually, I'd say this is just a total pass in this one. The next fight is in the lightweight division. We have Michael Johnson taking on Thiago Moises. The opening betting line for this fight was Moises minus 155, Johnson plus 135. Since then, action came in on Johnson. We're now looking at a minus 110 pick'em on both sides. So, needless to say, the more experienced guy, Johnson, is getting more action. I actually agree with the opening line in this one and disagree with the line movement. I think that Moises should be a pretty decent favorite in this one. Minus 150 is definitely appropriate, because Johnson can definitely win if he keeps the fight standing, but he's just going to have to fight a very technically sound fight. He's going to have to be on point for the full 15 minutes, and he just is not that type of fighter. I mean, this guy has lost so many fights when he was the better fighter than his opponent, and he just let it slip through his fingers. I mean, Darren Elkins, Josh Emmett, and Stevie Ray are 3 really recent examples of fights that he just let go. He was beating all of those guys, and somehow was able to get taken down or to get knocked out of some fashion in all 3 of them. And Johnson is kind of just a wasted talent, and I think he's definitely a declining fighter at this stage in his career. And I think Moises has been a little underwhelming in his UFC career as well. I definitely had higher hopes from him, seeing his LFA fights, seeing his Contender Series fights. But he got dominated by Dariush. He was dominated by Ismagulov as well. He did have a nice performance against Holloway in there, where he showed some decent wrestling. He showed his striking skills. But on the feet in this one, I would definitely give an advantage to Johnson. He's still going to be the better striker overall. He's got that slick southpaw boxing. But I think that Moises will be competitive on the feet. But where this fight gets non-competitive is on the ground. Moises is a world-class black belt. He actually has really good wrestling too. I've seen some nice double leg takedowns from him, especially in the Holloway fight, and I think that takedown will be the key to victory here. I think that Moises will probably start to get outstruck on the feet, look to level change, hit that double leg, and then once he gets Johnson on the ground, I think that should be a wrap. I think if you watch Johnson on the mat in round 3 versus Stevie Ray, he looked awful. I mean, he got taken down and had no energy left. I mean, this was the 3rd round after all, but he could not get up. He just got his back taken. He he showed no initiative getting back to his feet and let that fight slip through his fingers. A very winnable decision for him, but it went Ray's way, and probably rightfully so. I thought that Johnson won that fight watching it live, but rewatching it, I can see why Ray stole that decision. So I think that Johnson could win this fight if he keeps it on the feet, if he maybe is able to hurt Moises with some punches while they're striking, but if Johnson does not get Moises out of there by knockout, I think that Moises eventually drags him to the ground, starts to out-grapple him, and eventually gets a submission. So the pick in this one is going to be Moises by submission, and I like the value at -110 for Moises, and that's the best price it's been all week. So maybe we even see Moises jump up to an underdog at some point. So I think there's a ton of value on Moises' line. I would wait to hit it until we get a more definitive idea of where the price is going to close towards fight night. So once again, the pick is Moises by submission. And the next fight takes us to the heavyweight division. We have Azure-Arlovski taking on Felipe Lins. The opening betting line for this one was Lins -205, Arlovski +175. Right now we are seeing Lins -155, Arlovski +135. So Lins making his UFC debut. He's been picking up nice wins over in the PFL promotion. He's been looking pretty solid over there. I actually like what I see from Lins as a heavyweight. He's got good boxing skills, not too much power, but just good consistent volume. Got good clinched knees where he was able to finish some of his opponents. And what I like most about him is his gas tank. Honestly, he seems to have a really good gas tank. He's been fighting 5-round fights over in PFL, and he's comfortable going into those late rounds, and that's what you want to see against Arlovski, because 8 of Arlovski's last 9 fights have gone to the decision. He's had some questionable volume in a lot of them. He let a lot of those fights slip away from him, a lot of decisions he could have won that he lost by a small margin. And he's also had some good performances where he's won decisions by a wide margin too. So Arlovski's kind of a weird specimen at this point. I mean, look at that last fight versus Rosenstrike. Just terrible performance. He was knocked out in 30 seconds. He ran right into a left hook that Rosenstrike was fainting in front of his face. It was just a terrible performance. And, you know, it was weird because Arlovski went to decision 8 of his 8 fights in a row, 8 heavyweight fights in a row. It's not common they go to decision, and then he just gets knocked out in one punch by Rosenstrike. And it wasn't even the cleanest punch. It was just like a nice little check left hook, and it just put Arlovski out. So who knows what to think about Arlovski. His durability is a definite question. I think Lins is definitely the better athlete, the more durable, the fresher fighter at this point in his career. But he's also coming off of a 17-month layoff, has not fought since December of 2018. This fight was announced several months ago, though, and it's been postponed multiple times. So both guys should be in shape. They've known about this fight for a long time. I'm sure they've stayed ready throughout the quarantine, and I'm sure that Lins will be ready for this tough test in his first UFC fight. I think I agree with the line movement a little bit. Money should come in Arlovski. I don't think Lins should quite be -200. I think that Lins should be a 60% favorite, around -150 in this fight, and I think that he could run away with it. I mean, he could start winning the fight early, and Arlovski could be out of ideas. I mean, he really does not have much besides boxing and low kicks at this point. But, I mean, he looked good versus Rothwell. He had extremely high output and great success with his boxing in that fight. But then Rothwell looked terrible in his last fight versus Struve. So maybe that was more of a case of Rothwell being shot than Arlovski looking good. But we'll talk more about Rothwell when he fights later in the card. So in this one, I'm picking Lins to win a decision. I think that he will have the better output throughout the 3 rounds and outboxes Arlovski. But it's a close fight. I think I would pass in the betting line in this one. I'd say it's dog or pass. Although I do favor Lins to come in here and win this decision. It's hard laying that favorite price on him in his UFC debut off a long layoff against a tough proven guy like Arlovski. So it's going to be dog or pass, but the pick is Lins' decision. The next fight is the first fight on the main card in the middleweight division. We have Carl Roberson taking on Marvin Vettori. The opening betting line for this one was Vettori the favorite, -150, Roberson +130. Right now we are seeing Vettori -170, Roberson +150. Slightly more action coming in on Vettori's way, and I agree with that action. I think that Vettori has a very good matchup in this one. I've been really impressed with what I've seen from Vettori lately. I think he's making huge improvements. His takedown defenses look sharp. His boxing has looked really good. He's had good output in cardio, a win in all 3 rounds of his fights. I mean, he dominated Mutanchi and Andrew Sanchez and has had a lot of good performances lately. So I'm really liking from what I've seen of Vettori. Roberson has picked up some decent wins in his past few fights over Kopylov and over Turman. Although the Turman fight was really close, he struggled with the grappling of Turman, and he didn't look overly impressive versus Kopylov, but he did turn it up late. He got a takedown, took Kopylov's back, and was able to get a 3rd round rear naked choke in that fight. But I don't think Roberson will be able to take down Vettori because Vettori's takedown defense is just so good. He's got good footwork and good boxing, straight punches to keep Roberson from coming into takedown range versus him. And I just think that Roberson will be outgunned on the feet as well. I think Vettori is the better boxer. It's going to be a fun southpaw versus southpaw matchup. And I just think that Roberson is more of a power-reliant striker. I think Vettori is much more technical and probably outboxes Roberson on the feet, is able to stuff any takedowns, and wins a pretty comfortable decision in this one. I like Vettori's output a lot more. He lands 4 significant strikes per minute versus 3 for Roberson. So I just think this is a very tough matchup for Roberson. He's not going to be able to take Vettori down, and I think he's going to have a hard time landing on Vettori as well. So I understand people coming in on Vettori, betting him at the price. I would cap him at around 65 to 70%. So I think he should be around minus 200 here. So there's still some value left on Vettori at 170, and the pick is going to be Vettori by decision. The next fight is in the bantamweight division. We have Ray Borg taking on Ricky Simón. The opening betting line was Borg minus 125, Simón plus 105. Right now the line has flipped. We are now seeing Simón minus 170, Borg plus 150, so a lot of action coming in on Simón. I agree with the line flipping in this one. I think Simón should be the favorite here. It's worth noting that this fight is at 135. Borg has fought most of his career at 125, but just cannot make the weight and is being forced to move up to 35 again. And he's just been undersized and has not fought as well at 35. His gas tank is not as good, and he's not able to outgrapple guys as easily as he is at 125. I mean, he could be one of the best flyweights in the world if he can get that weight right, but instead he's kind of just an above average bantamweight. And I think that he's really going to struggle here because he can't outgrapple Simón. I mean, Simón has only been outgrappled by one guy, and that was Merab, who was just a beast at 135, one of the best grapplers at 135, and just relentless takedowns and pressure. And Borg does have a similar fighting style. I just don't think he will have as much success versus Simón. Simón is really hard to hold down. He's got great defensive wrestling, great get-ups. He's just so hard to hold down. And I think that Borg will really struggle because grappling is his main path to victory. His striking is not very good. He's not comfortable striking. And if he's not grappling, I have a hard time seeing him win this fight. I think that Simón will be the better striker. I think he's more aggressive on the feet. He's definitely not scared to get hit. I mean, that last fight versus Font, he showed a pretty good chin. I mean, he did get knocked out by Uriah Faber. We had some questions about his chin. And then he goes out there and absorbs some massive strikes from Rob Font in a very competitive fight that he lost by decision. But I think that Simón is the much more natural bantamweight. He's going to be the more physical, aggressive guy in there. I give a slight advantage to him in the striking. Actually, more of a massive advantage to him in the striking. And I actually give him a slight advantage in the grappling as well. So I think Simón is able to defend Borg's takedowns, do more damage on the feet, and be the more active guy in winning this decision. I think that we actually might see Simón hitting his own takedowns on Borg too. So it should be a fun, exciting, high amplitude fight, but I'm going to pick Simón to win a decision. But at this price of minus 170, I think it's a pass now. I think the people who came in early on Simón getting maybe below minus 150 on him got a good price, but I think it's getting a little steep now. Simón isn't the most reliable fighter, has let some fights slip through his fingers that he should have won. So it's going to be a pass in the betting line. Will not advise betting on Borg either because I think he does lose here. But once again, the pick is Simón by decision. The next fight is in the lightweight division. We have Drew Dober taking on Alexander Hernandez. Opening betting line here was Dober, the favorite, at -140. Hernandez, the +120 underdog. Since then, two-way action is coming in. We now see Dober -120, Hernandez +100. So really fun fight here. And I like this matchup for Drew Dober a lot. I think he's been looking fantastic lately. He's been getting some quick knockouts over good competition. And he did lose that Beneil Dariush fight, which was a pretty bad loss. He made a lot of mistakes in that fight. He was winning that fight and just made a series of mistakes. I mean, terrible decision after terrible decision that led to him getting armbarred in that second round. But I think that he has really turned a corner in his past two fights. He's really starting to fight to the best of his abilities, using his incredible boxing, his great pressure, and setting up that southpaw left hand of his that has been putting people to sleep. So his opponent, Alex Hernandez, on the other hand, has not been looking too good. He suffered his first loss, getting knocked out by Cerrone in round 2 back in early 2019, and then came back to fight Francisco Trinaldo and was very tentative, was not as aggressive as usually was. He was getting counterstruck, got outstruck throughout that entire fight, and then was gifted a very lucky decision by his hometown Texas judges. But regardless of my opinion on the decision in that one, I think it's irrefutable that Alex Hernandez did not look the same fighter he did versus Beneil Dariush and versus OAM, and when he was undefeated and aggressive. And I think that losing to Cerrone definitely humbled Hernandez a little bit. I think it made him realize that he has to change his fighting style, that he can't just charge forward in the pocket all the time, because that really is his style. I mean, he waits on the outside and then he charges in with big bursts of offense, getting crazy wild punches and shooting for takedowns and muscling takedowns. I mean, he is a pretty good grappler, but he just doesn't really excel in any aspect of grappling. He has decent takedowns, decent top pressure, decent scrambling ability, but I do not think that he will be able to reliably outgrapple Dober here. Dober has struggled with grappling in the past. He has been taken down by Camacho. I mentioned earlier how he got submitted by Dariush, but Dariush is a way better grappler than Hernandez, and he caught Dober in a very crafty armbar. I just don't see Hernandez having the reliable enough takedowns, top pressure to keep Dober on the ground. And the biggest thing is, I don't think he's going to be able to get close enough to Dober on the feet, because Dober is going to have a massive striking advantage in this fight. I think he's going to be counter-punching Hernandez hard, and I actually think that he probably knocks Hernandez out at some point here, because, I mean, there is just a massive skill discrepancy in the boxing between these two. I really do not think that Hernandez has much boxing skill at all, and I think Dober is one of the best boxers in the division, and he proved that by knocking out one of the other best boxers in the division in Nasrat Haqparast in his last fight. It was just an incredible performance. It definitely Drew Dober's best win to date, and I think that he is really coming into himself as a fighter right now. He's training at Team Elevation with Justin Gaethje, who of course had his magnificent performance a few days ago, winning the championship. So it's a culmination of a lot of things. I think that Dober is improving in his fights. He's fighting in a great camp with great coaches and training partners, and I listened to an interview with him where he sounded very realistic in his approach to the fight and how he's going to tactically approach this and his game plan, and he just sounded very good, and definitely could be a bit biased because I listened to that interview, but I think the tape speaks for itself. We see Dober, who is a massively improving fighter, and Hernandez, who is a very inexperienced fighter who's still kind of learning about himself and definitely showing some weaknesses in his game, and is showing that his game is just not very in depth overall. So I think we see Drew Dober put on another great performance here. I think he counter punches Hernandez coming into the pocket and catches him with a knockout victory here. So the pick is going to be Drew Dober by knockout. In the co-main event of the evening, in the heavyweight division, we have Ovince St. Preux, OSP, taking on Ben Rothwell. The opening line for this one was OSP, the slight favorite, -125, Rothwell +105. Right now we are seeing OSP -140, Rothwell +120. So, wow, this is insane that this fight is co-main event. OSP moving up to heavyweight. OSP has been definitely declining the past few years, but he looked okay in his last fight against Mikhail Olechechuk, was able to weather an early storm, got rocked with some punches, but was able to start taking Mikhail down and was actually able to get that OSP choke again in round 2. And I think that he has definitely looked like the more fresher, capable fighter than Rothwell has lately. I mentioned Rothwell earlier in the podcast. In his fight with Azure-Arlovski, and his past 2 fights, he has just looked so bad. He's looked slow and hittable, and he got lit up with punches by Arlovski. He was eating head kicks and punches from Struve, and was actually able to win that Struve fight because of some crazy stuff that happened in that fight. Hilarious fight. I recommend you go back and rewatch it, but Benton-Rothwell did not deserve that victory at all. He proved nothing in that fight, and even though he was able to knock out Struve after those nut shots, that's not a good performance at all from Rothwell. I think that OSP's win over McCall Olachechuk was definitely more promising than the most recent fights we've seen from Rothwell. And even in OSP's loss against Nikita Krylov, he was adamant about takedowns early in that fight. He attempted a lot of takedowns early, and that's what you want to see. Is OSP knows that grappling is his only path to victory, and I think that that's the best path to victory here against Rothwell. I think he should go for takedowns, try to use his athleticism to get Rothwell down to the mat in the first 5 to 7 minutes, because after that, I think OSP will start to gas out and he won't be capable of hitting takedowns anymore. But in the first 5 to 7 minutes of this fight, I definitely favor OSP to hit takedowns and to look to outgrapple and possibly submit Rothwell here on the ground. Rothwell does have that front choke of his that he likes to use as takedown defense, but I don't think that will work at this point in his career. I think that we're just seeing Rothwell massively decline athletically, and he just can't avoid strikes in the feet. He just does not see strikes coming, and even though I don't think OSP will be a big threat on the feet, I just like what I've seen from OSP a lot more lately. I think he'll be the better athlete. I actually like the move up to heavyweight for OSP. It's a short notice opportunity. He should be fully hydrated instead of cutting the weight down to heavyweight to light heavyweight for a change. So I like OSP in this fight. I think that you should definitely it's definitely a favorite or pass situation before the fight. Maybe look to live bet Rothwell if he survives round 1, or maybe midway through round 2, because he could start to take over later in the fight. But I definitely favor OSP to hit takedowns early, and the pick is going to be OSP by submission. Now in the main event of the evening, in the light heavyweight division, we have Anthony Smith taking on Glover Teixeira. The opening betting line for this one was Smith, the minus 165 favorite, to Teixeira, the plus 135 underdog. Right now we are seeing Smith minus 175, Teixeira plus 155. So two-way action coming in on this fight. I would say a little more on Smith's side. Smith is the much younger guy. I think he has I wouldn't say even the better wins lately, though. I mean, Glover Teixeira, despite him being old, despite him not looking like the same fighter he once was, despite him struggling a lot in these past few fights, he is 3-0 in his past 3 fights against 3 younger, probably more talented, athletic guys. Definitely more athletic guys. I mean, Roberson, Kudalaba, and Krylov were all more athletic than Glover. But Glover is still being durable. He still has good technique. He's still hard to finish. And he's still a hard guy to beat. And I think that in the pre-fight betting line, I think that Glover has some value. I like Glover's chances at winning this fight early, and I think that he could be a problem for Smith on the feet, and I think that on the ground, he's certainly going to be a problem for Smith. I think that Glover is the much better grappler. He still has some ability to hit takedowns, and he does really good work from top position with ground and pound, with taking backs, with his arm triangle chokes, and I think that if he can get Smith down on his back in the first round or 2, I think that there's a great chance that Glover submits Anthony Smith here. But if Smith is able to weather that early storm and to get Glover into rounds 3, 4, and 5, that's when Smith's athleticism, his cardio should take over, and that's when Glover should start to fade, and Smith probably finishes Glover in the later rounds. I really don't see this one going to a decision because just how old Glover is, and we haven't seen him go to many decisions lately anyway. I mean, the Krylov fight, he was able to win that fight via decision. He secured 2 rounds of that fight. Although he started to fade really badly in round 3. I mean, he's a sensational grappler, Glover is, and Krylov is not so much, but Krylov started to out-grapple Glover-Teixeira in round 3 just because of how tired Glover was. So I think that Glover has a small window to win this fight, early round 1, round 2. But if he does not get that takedown, I think that he is probably doomed and probably gets outstruck by Smith in the feet and eventually gets knocked out in the later rounds. So the pre-fight value is on the dog, and Glover looked to live bet Anthony Smith if he survives the first few rounds. And I actually think that Smith will survive. I think that Glover is going to struggle getting the fight down to the floor because, I mean, even Ion Cutelaba was able to stuff like 7 of 7 takedowns versus Glover-Teixeira because Glover just doesn't have that speed, that explosiveness to shoot takedowns on his opponents anymore. Smith definitely struggles with takedown defense. He struggles with getting off of his back once he's on the floor. So I definitely think that that's what Glover is going to push for. He's going to look to get those takedowns. But if he does not get them, like I said, I think he's getting knocked out by Smith here. So in terms of an official pick, I'm going to go with Smith by 3rd round knockout. But I think the chances of Glover getting that early submission are pretty decent too. So I understand the people who are pre-fight betting Glover in this one. I would say it's definitely dog or pass. Once again, look to live bet Anthony Smith if he is able to stay off his back early in this fight. So once again, Smith round 3 knockout is the official prediction here. So in terms of bets for this one, definitely don't feel as strongly as I did about the last card, UFC 249. I definitely think I will end up on Drew Dober, Marvin Vettori, Thiago Moises, Gabriel Benitez, Brian Kelleher, and Chase Sherman. And just for undetermined amounts yet, I'll post my final bets over on my Bet MMA Tips page. You can find that in the description on YouTube or on my Twitter page, UFO_UFC. So we got 3 UFC events in 1 week. That'll be 3 Martian MMA episodes. Thank you all for tuning in again. I will be back by the end of the week to break down the next UFC card going down this Saturday. But that'll do it for this Wednesday edition of the UFC, and I will see you all later this week. I hope you enjoy the card this Wednesday night. Peace.